So let's get started. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
So here we are nearing the end of our Beethoven festival. And I thought it was very, very important, as I've done with all three periods, to end with complete works of Beethoven. And with the late period, I chose two solid shows with full pieces so we can have an in-depth listening to the whole context of the piece. And next week we'll look at the Opus 109 and 111 piano sonatas. But as I said last week, we listened to the Grosse Fuge, and quartets tend to play Opus 130 and 133 most often, I would say, out of the late quartets. This quartet, even in my tenure with the cancellations last spring, it would have been more, but it's happened 3 times on the series in 6 years, which is a lot, which is quite a lot to hear this. But it's a very, very unique piece. It, as I said, really confounded people when it was first heard, especially in the Grosse Fuge. And there's a story of Beethoven, sitting at the tavern waiting for the reading to have gone through the premiere. He curiously didn't show up, and they repeated the dance movements, and he was a little perturbed that they did not repeat the fugue. But this piece is really, it's 6 movements, which in itself is unusual, but 6 movements that are quite different from one another. They're just really disparate moods of all of these movements, and they could be considered even character pieces on their own. I mean, they could really stand, on their own as pieces. But I thought I'd start by reading a little bit of Swafford about the piece in general. And he says, for the ears and sensibilities of its time, Opus 130 fell apart to a degree that suggested its composer was afflicted likewise. The outlandish finale was proof of the madness of the whole. To the ears of the distant future, though, this and all the late quartets would be signs not of madness, but rather of prophecy, music as an occult puzzle, eternally modern. It must be added that in tone, most of the Opus 130 is neither crazed nor despairing, but instead ironic and comic, though the humor is subtle and one movement is inexpressibly tragic, referring to the cavatina. So even Beethoven himself described the opening movement as an extended introduction to the piece, which I found very interesting. And tonight, I wanted to look very closely at the dance movements, the shorter dance movements. We'll take a look at the cavatina. Of course, we could not skate over the cavatina. And then, of course, we'll talk about the fugue. I don't want to get too heavy into analysis of the fugue because, like I said, we could spend weeks, months analyzing the Grosse Fuge. But I wanted to just start off by taking a look at the second movement, and we'll go right to the score here. So the second movement, I think, lasts about 2.5 minutes. Very quick. And it's a presto. It's not marked. There's no indication of what this is, but can anybody tell me what the second movement is in actuality? Hard, since you heard it. It's been a while since you've heard it, but we'll listen to it again. I won't give it away, but basically, I mean, this goes by in a whisker. The tempo is obviously presto. It's very quick. It's basically dun da da 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 dun. Dun da da 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 dun. So bum ba da dum 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 bum ba. Bum ba da dum 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 bum ba. It's very simple. It just and he repeats this in a pianissimo very quickly. And notice again the key signatures in late Beethoven. He's giving us all sorts of flats here. He's in B flat minor there.
He loves D flat.
5 flats. Yes, he goes into these keys with many, many, many flats and sharps in the late period. So then we have the A. I label it the A subject. It goes and repeats and basically lasts about, I don't know, 10 seconds. And then he goes to the B section, and I call it. It could also be A prime because it's very similar. Dun da da dum ba da dum bum ba da da ba dee dum bum ba da da bum ba da da bum ba da da ba ba da ba. But notice how he's using these swells that go by. Again, to play this is very difficult. So he's got this sort of like these little bursts of swells. I only mark it in the first violin part here, but it's throughout the strings in all the instruments here. And then he goes right into what I call the C section and possibly a giveaway trio question. Right into B flat major. Listesso tempo. Does anybody know what listesso tempo means?
Listesso tempo.
Same tempo.
The same tempo, correct. I know a very, very horrible famous story that I can't name any names, but a certain violist in the Philadelphia Orchestra was complaining about a conductor, and this person's stand partner asked why, and the violist said, well, he didn't change tempo. It says listesso tempo there. Ouch. So, but importantly, it's not only listesso tempo, he goes into 6/4 meter, which is a triple meter. So this is bum ba da dum 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 bum bum beforehand, and then it's ba 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 ba. But look what he does here. He puts the emphasis on the second beat, on a weak beat. Typically, it would be on the downbeats, like that. But he displaces the emphasis and puts it on the basically the second beat of the bars. Very, very interesting. So he's got this the C section and trio section, and then D, and I call it B prime. So it's basically, and that's why I call it B prime. It's very similar to this figure here. And this is it's a tongue twister for the first fiddle. That is such an impossibly hard part for the first fiddle player to play through this.
The accidental.
But notice here, he's building crescendo forte, and then subito pianissimo here. Subito pianissimo goes by, and he's going through these keys, and then back to the and then goes back and repeats it, and then he goes here, and it's so basically, he's taking this this figure and then slows it down. Hence my big back arrow. It's not just a retardando slowing down, but he slows down metrically. He slows the notes down. He triples them in duration. It's very cool. And then he did again D, and then this chromatic thing where the fiddle just collapses chromatically D, and then this interruption and then back to the A, and I call it da capo. And so he changes in the da capo in the A, and the return to the A theme. Dum ba 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 da bum ba dum ba da ba. He has that connector to the two figures. Bum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba da bum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba da. And then here he embellishes again. He doesn't quote it the same way as it happened before. Look at all the trills. See that? Trill, and then these offbeats. He mixes it up for the repeat of the tune.
Interesting.
and then goes to the end. It's very, very interesting. So what, in looking how I map this out, what form would this be?
You mean a scherzo movement? Is that what you're talking about?
Scherzo, yes, it's a scherzo. But it doesn't say scherzo. He's not spelling out scherzo. He doesn't, usually a scherzo is A repeat, B repeat, then C repeat, then D repeat. But he goes, look at this D. He goes all the way down here, does this. Then he has this weird transition in the middle. And then the da capo is not a real da capo because he's embellishing it down here. It's really, really fun and interesting. Let's give a listen to it while we follow along the music. Let me stop the share for a second. Computer sound. Here we go. So here we go, second movement. Goes down. The first violin. So you see, it's just, it goes by in a blink, this movement. And the first fiddle player is doing calisthenics through the whole thing.
Yeah, how does the first violinist have time for those little sforzandos in the middle of a measure? Like you miss it, it's over.
It's not only that, when he adds the trills and then the octave in that offbeat, it just, I mean, it just goes by so quickly.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to play. And Corinna Belcher was absolutely amazing. So here's, he has this long introduction to this piece in the first movement, and then he comes in with this thing that you blink, it's over. It just flies right by. And then he has the third movement, which is sort of almost an intermezzo in this piece. And then he goes to the next dance movement, which we'll look at. Let's take a look at the fourth movement. So this is as I had said on the show, can we see the score?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So Alla Danza Tedesca, it's a German dance.
Mm-hmm.
Now look again, and I want to look at the dynamics here, how he uses the dynamics. He's got these swells again, only and here again, I've talked about this in Beethoven's writing before in dynamics, where he crescendos and then subito piano. So this is Dee-da-ding, dee, da-da-da-ding, da, dee-da-ding, dum, da-da-dee-dum. See what he does there? Got that little swell subito piano crescendo to piano again. And then here, he does the A and he repeats, and then here's the B, which is very similar to this dee da dum ba, dee da dum ba, dee da da dee da 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 dee da dee be, da da dee da dum, dee da dee dum, da da dee dum da dum. Okay, so we get to C here, moves on to this, where he's in G major. This is all, he likes G major. He goes to the dominant up here in D major, which is very typical, and then back to G major when he goes to the C. And then he stays in G major in the C section. And here's a figure. Dee da dum bum bum ba dee, dee da dum bum bum ba. Very straightforward. In the fiddle, it gets repeated. And then he goes immediately into C major from G major, which again is G major is the dominant of C major, so it makes sense. And then he goes into the lower strings here. Dee da dum bum bum ba dee ba da dee beep beep ba. And then he goes. He adds these, and I'm sorry, I skipped over. He adds in this section these 16th note runs here as accompaniment to the theme, and it happens throughout. So here's another one. He goes into A minor, which is the relative minor of C major. It's the same key signature. So it's all nothing weird harmonically. And then E minor, which again is the dominant of A minor, the 5th degree, makes all the sense in the world, and stays piano, and then goes from E minor to B major, again, the 5th, the dominant, up to B major. And then he comes back to A in the da capo, dee da dee be da 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 dee ba dum, G major, and then look what he does here. So he gets back to the A here, typically da capo, and just like in the other dance movement, he messes with it. So here he has another statement of the thing, and he makes a little variation in the fiddle. It's the same tune, only he's just embellishing it with 16th notes. 16th notes. And then he goes to the A1 variation, which is back there, and he's again embellishing. It's the same tune, and he's just adding all of these, again, calisthenics in the fiddle. And goes crescendos, and then again, subito piano here, just like he did in the other movement. So it's just, he's using the same techniques as he did with the other dance movement, with the dynamics and structure of this piece. So this is also a scherzo that he is again not indicating back here, not indicating it's a scherzo, but it's essentially a scherzo. But it's very, very interesting what he's doing dynamically here with these little bursts of sound. It almost, I liken it to getting a little seasick when you're listening to it, because it swells and goes down so much. Let's give a listen and follow along to the music here of the German dance. Again, it's only 3 minutes long. It's a lovely, lovely little movement. Here we go. The variation, listen. It's such a charming, weird little movement. It's weird.
Would you, you say that it's a scherzo, but doesn't it have a minuet quality to it? I mean,
Yeah,
know
that's what I thought.
Minuet and scherzo are very analogous in the place in the,
A little slower would be a minuet.
A little bit, yeah, but I mean, typically you would even say in the trios of these pieces that they'd take a little bit more time in a typical minuet. It's not as strict. I mean, this is what Beethoven is doing. It's generally considered what he's actually doing, to be technical, is that it is a dance movement. You can call it a scherzo, you can call it a minuet. I could argue with you, but it's also in a rounded binary form. It's also an ABA generally. And he's superimposing those two, forms into one, and which is, I believe, why he does not ascribe the scherzo moniker to it, scherzo trio moniker, because I think he's messing with the forms in general.
Well, and he didn't assign a minuet name to it either.
No, he didn't.
Same thing applies.
Absolutely. And that goes for neither movement. They're generally both considered scherzi. You know, but this is, he marks it as a German dance. He has a little clip. I mean, it's dee da da ba da 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 dee ba da dee da dee ba. There's that lift. There's that lift every single time. But his use of dynamics in this, and now it's these little bursts everywhere, it makes it a little bit uneasy, a little bit of a, you know, like maybe somebody's had a little bit too much to drink while they're dancing the German dance, you know?
So they need.
You know, but it's so charming, and how he innovates, you know, on making the variation. You hear the variation, it's the same tune. He's just embellishing it all over the place in the repeat of the A subject matter.
That lift in the third beat that you were just talking about, it's only in the first violin. The second violin and viola sustain the whole.
They go through. It's absolutely true. It's I should, to be more specific, it's whoever has the tune. It's not just in the first fiddle. But yes, the tune has that lift and that lilt. It's wonderful. It's really, really wonderful. I wanted to focus on those little movements because in this piece, they're skipped over because they're so fleeting, and you've got the cavatina and the fugue in this piece. But we must look at the cavatina. The cavatina is one of the most beautiful and tragic pieces in Western music history. Period. How's that for a statement? It's a remarkable piece of music. I'm going to read one little passage from Swafford. Here we go. But in the B flat, another Beethoven pattern is going to be put aside. After 4 movements, call them comic, ironic, dancing, and gently wistful, comes the cavatina. one of the most elegiac and tragic of all movements by Beethoven or anyone else. It is a song of endless heartbreak, the models for which in his life were endless. Beethoven said he had never been so moved in composing a movement. Even the thought of it brought him to tears. In his youth, he had laughed at the tears of his listeners when he improvised. Now the tears were his own, and he did not scorn them. Though the movement is some 7 minutes, it seems much longer because it has another of the wide-arching melodies of late slow movements. The manifestly sobbing last section in a dark C-flat major is marked beklemmt, anguished. So he puts this marking, and we'll look at the score briefly, but he puts this marking beklemmt. Was not, as far as I'm concerned, used in music history before or perhaps since. It's maybe he puts in beklemmt, and beklemmt means a choking, an oppressed, a tight-chested feeling. A very deeply emotional reading. Interestingly, the cavatina, Carl Sagan used it on the golden record that was sent into space with the Voyager spacecrafts. Do we know about the golden record? So it's a reflection of humankind to space that they had assembled, and it was he put the full cavatina as a reflection of mankind's greatest achievements.
Cool.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. I have a couple quotes. First from Mark Steinberg from the Brentano Quartet about the cavatina. And he quotes Sagan. He says, in Pale Blue Dot, Sagan writes, quote, "It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world," unquote. Beethoven's cavatina indeed deals with the folly of human conceits, the frailty and vulnerability of our love and our tenuous ability to communicate it. Indeed, our deep lack of any true model of our inner states. And it touches on the richness of the human capacity for love, as well as the loneliness of isolation and the chasm between feeling and expression. I thought that was a really marvelous way to express, the expression of love and isolation, which is what this piece is really about. I have another quote from Theodor Adorno. Do we know Adorno? Musicologist, yes. And this is pretty heavy. The dying hand releases what it has previously clutched, fast, shaped, controlled, so that what is released becomes its higher truth. Really, really wonderful piece. The cavatina is an extraordinary piece of music, and to have this along with the Grosse Fuge in one piece of music is just ridiculous almost. How the genius of this man. So let's take a look at the score. So Adagio molto espressivo, slow and very expressive. So we have 3 flats. So E flat major or C minor. And look at the tune doesn't come in until the end of the bar, but look what he does. I didn't do much harmonic breakdown in this, but look how he starts the movement. He's in 3 beats. He's going from, he touches E flat major, C dominant 7, F, B flat dominant 7, then lands in E flat major on the downbeat of the second bar. So even in this little mini intro here, he's got us not firmly set in E flat major. And he's got, again, these swells. See, I'm noting these swells of expression. And sotto voce, we've seen that marking before. What does that mean?
Low voice.
Under a spoken voice, technically.
Low voice.
So softly and under your regular voice. And the tune itself has, and I've highlighted some of them, appoggiaturas, and I've mentioned appoggiaturas before, but does anybody know what an appoggiatura is?
It's an embellishment. It's a kind of a turn.
Addition.
Embellishment.
No, actually. An appoggiatura is a note that's not in the chord that resolves. So it's tension release. Tension release. So he's that G is not in the chord. This is A flat major chord with an I'm not looking at this. F, C, a F minor chord. So it's tension release. Da dee dee da dee da da dee dee. And again, so the tune goes on in here, and I look at the swell here, and look where he lands. Again, he's shifting the emphasis of the bar. In a 3/4 bar, the emphasis should be on the first beat. He's swelling to the second beat. That's where the juice is here. See where the peak of the crescendo is? On the third beat to that A. And he does this over and over again. So here we go, another the appoggiatura again. And here's another one that goes up. And crescendo again, D, da, D on the second beat here, and then goes down. So it's generally very quiet and has these momentary swells to forte. We'll go down here where he embellishes the tune when he repeats it, but look again. He puts the emphasis here on the second beat. The phrase is going to the weak beat, to the weak beat. It's very unusual and very, very, very effective. And he only stays in forte. Right here, he's crescendoing only over 2 beats and then to forte and then back down. It's only for a moment that he goes to the forte where it's strength, and then it gives away to sadness. Gives away to sadness. And it's a remarkable movement. And then he gets to the section, and here it comes, where the fiddle has a sort of obligato. He's getting into triplets here in the accompaniment. He sets it up here. And here's the marking, beklemmt. So choked, hold it back, tense. This is an outpouring of sadness in the fiddle, and pianissimo. Everything is pianissimo. And again, as Swafford had said, in C flat major. C flat major is the same and harmonically to what key? Musicians, we had this before. Anyone? What's a half step below C?
B major, right?
B major. Thank you, Brian, B major. But he's notating it, he's C flat major. And he's not changing the key signature. He's just giving you the G flat here, the C flat here, and the E flats remain. And so he's got this triplet accompaniment with the fiddle, just doing this obligato tune, crescendo again, in piano, crescendo, and then back down here. And again, look here, the emphasis on the second beat. He's landing on the second beat emotionally. It's very unusual, very unusual. And then again, here's a restatement of the tune, sottovoce. And he goes and ends again, just quietly with this movement. It's a very, structurally, it's a very simple, straightforward movement. Very simple. But he uses the dynamics and the emphasis of where the phrase is going to cause a little bit of interest where it's not happening where it's expected to in music. It's very, very wonderful, the cavatina. I really recommend going and listening to different quartets play this movement. I mean, you should listen to the whole piece, but to hear the cavatina and hear the different interpretations of the cavatina is a very useful exercise. It's really wonderful. Anybody thoughts about the Belches playing of the cavatina?
That the whole performance was extraordinary. I was just thinking the amount of work that they put into that preparation. It's just incredible. I was very impressed with it.
Yeah, again, these are live performances. These are live performances, and the skill and the expression that some of these artists and these quartets It's just extraordinary. A piece like this,
Hold on, let me get
you know, is just such a it's you know, like I had said about the Hammerklavier, it's one of the Mount Everest. It's one of these pieces in the string quartet repertoire that's just one of the most remarkable pieces of music ever, period. The Opus 3133. And it's funny, we talked about the enigmatic nature of 131 previously, but this one is very, it's a strange piece because there's not a lot of continuity between the movements. He does it in compositionally, and we can break apart motives that he's continuing throughout the course of the 6 movements and things.
131.
But they're really, this piece, the movements are completely different. Really completely different. Any thoughts about the cavatina? Well, let's move on. Let's move on to the last movement. The grosse fuga, again, we won't get into the structure and the composition of this monumental piece of art, but I thought it would be interesting to hear from 2 musicians speaking about the grosse fuga. And I have a quote from Arnold Steinhardt, who was the first violinist of the Guarneri String Quartet. And he wrote this, and Arnold, if you haven't read the books, he has 2 books, Indivisible by 4 and Violin Dreams is the second book. He's a wonderful writer. And he also has, and he's a lovely, interesting, brilliant guy. And he has a blog that's wonderful where I drew this quote from, called "In the Key of Strawberry." And it's basically writing about music and writing about his career, and they're essays, and they're just lovely. So I really, you should check it out, In the Key of Strawberry. So here's what he wrote. He wrote on the grosse fuga after he had worked on it as a student, first off. He said, "In years to come, I would begin to understand the grosse fuga in sober structural terms, but its last notes rang out for the very first time. But as its last notes rang out for the very first time, a feeling came over me that no other work has elicited before or since. The grosse fuga was more than music. It was an overwhelming act of nature." And again, Mark Steinberg, Beethoven's grosse fuga, Opus 133, is one of the great artistic testaments to the human capacity for meaning in the face of the threat of chaos. Abiding faith in the relevance of visionary struggle in our lives powerfully informs the structure and character of the music. This is surely one of the composer's most inspiring achievements. So it's with good reason in back-to-back weeks I aired the grosse fuga. It's one of these works, it's like the Chaconne of Bach. It transcends a lot of music. It's really that extraordinary piece of music. But Beethoven was convinced to drop it from the quartet when he published it by his, and this is, you know, we've gotten to know Beethoven over the course of 3 months, and this is a pretty unusual thing. And I have the story from Holtz, the violinist, Karl Holtz, I believe his name was. He was the second violinist of the Schopenzig Quartet, and he's the one that went back and reported to Beethoven after the performance in the tavern. And he was acting as sort of Beethoven's agent in this affair between him and Beethoven and his publisher, who was quite, you know, worried about publishing this piece with this weird fugue at the end of it. And Holtz writes, "The publisher Artraria, to whom I had sold the rights for the edition of the quartet in B flat for a price of 80 ducats, had charged me with the terrible and difficult mission of convincing Beethoven to compose a new finale, which would be more accessible to the listeners as well as the instrumentalist, to substitute for the fugue, which was so difficult to understand. I maintained to Beethoven that this fugue, which departed from the ordinary and surpassed even the last quartets in originality, should be published as a separate work, and that it merited a designation as a separate opus. I communicated to him that Artaria, the publisher, was disposed to pay him a supplementary honorarium for the new finale. Beethoven told me he would reflect on it, but already on the next day, I received a letter giving his agreement. So here's Beethoven, who, if you recall when we were talking about the Scottish songs and this guy who wanted him to alter the Scottish songs, he told the guy to take a leap, you know? And here's Beethoven in one day saying, okay, I'll write a substitute movement. It's astonishing, astonishing. And I have a passage from Maynard Solomon, the musicologist, about this very notion. And Maynard Solomon writes, why did Beethoven agree to separate the fugue from the quartet? Most biographers of Beethoven have marveled that this most stubborn of composers should so readily agree to alter the structure of a major composition. Some have attributed it to his preoccupation with Karl's suicide attempt, his nephew. Others to his desire for an additional 15 ducat payment. Still others to his disdain for those who were unable to grasp his intention. But the fact remains that the Grosse Fuge has struck many sensitive musicians, including its first hearers, as an unsatisfactory close to the quartet. So it is possible that Beethoven too came to feel that the fugue was too powerful, too strange to bring the quartet to an appropriate close. Beethoven must originally have believed that he had accomplished this in the enormous coda of the fugue with its dance-like victory symphony and its feeling of sunshine after storm. Evidently, however, the reverberations of pain and strife had not yet sufficiently died away, let alone been fully dissipated. And so he may have decided that the quartet required a catharsis, a return to normality, an epilogue in full daylight, a simple descent to earth, a reversion to classicism such as we find in the new finale, Marked Allegro. What do you think about that assessment?
Well, can one also suggest that he was attracted to the notion that it appear as a separate piece and separate opus because of its scope and weight and size, etc., that was not an unattractive notion to him?
I think so too. I think that is decidedly left out of this assessment here.
You know,
William.
Derek, as I recall, it's only fairly recently that quartets have started to play the Grosse Fuge as part of the quartet, right?
Correct.
Didn't they generally play the substitute finale?
Correct.
No, maybe 20 years ago, something like that.
Yes. And we're going to listen to that finale. Go ahead, William. Did you have something to say?
No, I forgot. But
John is exactly right. I can tell you that in my concert going history, I've only heard the finale, the substitute finale once performed. That the general performance practice now is to perform it with the Grosse Fuge. And you'll see it notated on programs as Opus 130, 133.
It was a big deal.
Yeah, William.
Did the separate opus, the Grosse Fuge, used to get played by itself in concerts?
I've never heard it as such. I believe it's possible that it had been. I'm not sure of the performance history, but John, what do you think about that?
Yeah.
I mean, basically what I think was that they played it, they just didn't play it.
Right.
They played the substitute finale.
And the Grosse Fuge sidelined.
And I mean, I can recall a couple concerts a couple times of hearing the substitute finale, then the Grosse Fuge.
Yeah, they would play it.
Which is really weird.
It's very weird.
It's for like an hour and a half quartet.
And it's also like it's what the Grosse Fuge also like to play the Grosse Fuge and then the finale afterwards. It's as an encore.
That makes
doesn't
no
really
sense.
work.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
You really, I mean, you shouldn't play anything after the Grosse Fuge.
No.
You really shouldn't put a little cookie at the end. You know, it's the same as the late piano sonatas. You know, that when you play all three late piano sonatas, it doesn't add up to a full 2 hours, but you can't play anything after the Opus 111 after you go through it. You just can't. You really can't.
Derek,
Although some have suggested otherwise.
Derek, to your point, I have heard the Grosse Fuge played as the finale and then
the substitute
Wow.
finale 130 as an encore. And you're right. I mean, just after 5 movements of 130 and then the grosse fuga, and you're exhilarated. You're spent in a great way. And then 130, the finale is nice in itself, but it just doesn't sit well afterwards. It just seems like a throw on, and that's not I think the way to hear it.
Yeah, I think so too. And interesting, we're going to listen to it right now. It's the last thing that Beethoven ever wrote, is this substitute finale. The last piece of music he ever wrote. So let's see it. I've got a, where is it here? Okay. Interestingly enough, I have the Belcher Quartet playing the original the substitute finale. Here we go. The Allegro finale from Opus 130. Here we go.
So Derek, did they then go on to play the Grosse Fuge in that?
No. In this concert?
In that concert, yeah. Do you know?
No, they did
No,
not.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an older performance, but yeah.
Well, it's a delightful movement. I mean,
Slightly different.
it goes down, yeah.
Goes down very easily, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But fascinating, right?
It is.
I
And it's
mean,
Would have been one of the middle quartet movements and it would have fit in fine there.
yeah.
yeah.
Like it seems to me that, I don't know if it's about appeasement or he just whipped this off, very quickly.
But
I mean,
it's good. Beautiful.
charming. I mean, it's very, very charming. It's lovely,
Yeah.
but you couldn't be more different.
And what affected the change over 20 years ago or 25 years ago when it became fashionable again to play the Grosse Fuge? Or
I think, the emphasis, it's an extension, I believe, of performance practice and going, to the original intent of composers, where even in music publishing, where you're going to the text or the original manuscript, I think it's really diving deep into what the composer wanted, and I think that has a lot to do with it. And that started with the, original instruments movements in the 80s and things like that, and where people started going back to the source, and scholarship, lent itself to a certain thing. It's hard for me to listen to that movement and associate it with this piece. I mean, it just is.
Mhm.
It just doesn't fit. Yeah, but that's because I've just, I've always, the Grosse Fuge has always been a part of that piece for me. So, yeah.
Well, you're younger, Derek, so
Yeah.
You don't have this long history.
I know. It's funny. But any other thoughts about this incredible piece?
Well, it's just it's really wonderful to see it looked at so closely as you have tonight with the scores and everything. Thank you.
Yeah,
Really brings a lot out.
thanks. It's a lot.
Great job. I agree. That was terrific. Yeah.
Well, it's tough because I also I don't want the Cliff Notes version. It's tough because there's so much. We could spend 6 months on this piece alone and break it down, and really every week and like look at what's going on in the music and everything. But I try to give you a sense of the craft behind what he's doing, and that there is a framework to what he's doing and how he's inventive with that framework. And this is what we speak about, geniuses breaking rules and things like that. And
Yeah.
and I'll say it again, it's not just because this guy's birthday just is this month, but Beethoven is such a titan in classical music history. He just is, with great reason. Great reason. You can spend your life just poring over his scores and his music.
Yeah.
And still discover something every day. Yeah. I mean, I've been listening, I can tell you, it's funny, we've been focusing on the late period. I've been listening a lot the past 2 weeks to the Missa Solemnis. And that is such an incredible masterwork.
It doesn't get performed much at all.
It doesn't get performed much at all. It doesn't.
People used to ask David Janauer why he hadn't never prepared or performed that piece, and he said, I can't understand it. I can't.
No, it's hard to digest.
I can't. Yeah.
It's hard to digest. It is an incredible piece. And I always listen to the Mass in C, and I would listen to that a lot. But I've been just poring over the Missa Solemnis, and it's marvelous. So,
can you
recommend thoughts?
A musicological way into that piece, or a book, or are you just looking at the score?
I've not even been looking at the score. I've been just listening to a recording over and over and over again and trying to learn it a little bit more deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Who's recording?
This is a recording with Carl Maria Giulini conducting, and Jose Van Dam is singing, who's one of my favorites. Who is the orchestra and chorus? Yikes. I believe it's Vienna.
Yeah, probably is.
I believe it's Vienna. But wow, what a recording. And Jose Van Dam, if you don't know his singing, he is one of the, I had the great fortune of presenting him in Philadelphia. Really fantastic bass baritone. One of the greats. So anyway. All right, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you much.
Have a wonderful holiday, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
you as well?
You too.
And we'll be here like clockwork next Monday night.
Right.
Close out the Beethoven Festival.
Very
All right.
enjoyable operation here.
Have a great night, everybody.
Great.
That was
Thank you
good.
so much, Derek.
So long.
So long.
Good night.